Just when we thought Meghan couldn't do another self-serving interview, she goes on to impress us all. Her interview with The Cut is a study in extreme entitlement. Before analyzing the most revealing passages of the article, and they are revealing, first a few relevant aspects of feature journalism which I've taught for 4 years, and which is the genre of this article. Contrary to traditional news reporting, features are characterized by a scene-by-scene construction, like movies and fiction. There are dialogues and information about the body language of the informants. There's a third-person perspective, so-called omniscient narration, meaning that the journalist slides in and out of the presumed feelings and thoughts of the informants. Finally, there are telling details. So rather than writing that the informant's annoyed, the journalist might write that the informant's avoiding eye contact and moves her legs up and down in a rapid motion. Implication is key, even though some features might contain both the bodily movements and the interpretation of these movements. Feature journalism marks the transition from static reporting, statistics and other cold facts, to emotional reporting, and is designed for 4 things, 4 goals. Captivating the audience, transporting the audience, identification, which is often easier because of the emotional descriptions, and persuasion, which hinges upon the audience's ability to identify themselves with the informant. Let's get to the article. If you liked the video, click the like button, and if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe for more videos. And don't forget to let us know what you think about this interview. This is a highly detailed analysis with lots of points that I think you can use in your own lives, so stick around to the end. The journalist Alison writes that Meghan relaxes in a cozy chair and gazes over all that is climate-controlled and high-ceilinged and sun-dappled and perfectly marshmallowy and hers. The connotations of these telling details is that it's dreamlike, like a fairy tale, and from the Oprah interview, we know how much fairy tales have influenced Meghan, even comparing herself to the heroic actions of none other than the Little Mermaid. Meghan's words, "Do you want to know a secret?" show us she's being amicable with Alison, making her feel special to be let in on this secret. Technically, it's called a pre-announcement. Pre-announcements go before the so-called base announcement, in this case that she's getting back on Instagram. That's the big secret, delivered in a way that initially points to Meghan's innate sense of self-importance, as revealed by the telling details and the keyword secret. Meghan talks about the devastating time when she had to give up her Instagram account. Alison writes that this was just one of the things she gave up, and that Meghan lost the freedom to open her own mail. The function of the words just and own is to dramatize Meghan's situation, ideally persuading the audience to relate to it, even though the objection could be made that Meghan knew this would happen, because this is the same for everyone in that position. Meghan then makes it sound like Harry was fortunate enough to have her choose him over Instagram. She first says it was a big adjustment, but then modifies it to huge through so-called self-repair, another dramatization. Alison writes that Meghan was permitted to join Harry, Kate and Will on a pre-existing account. And then she, unintentionally I think, but who knows, nails it with the relative clause that she had no control over, and this main clause that didn't sit right with Meghan. This is the case in point and goes back to the previous passage where we learned that things like giving up her passport and, as revealed in the Oprah interview, having to learn the national anthem were big problems for Meghan, allegedly. Why? Because she wasn't in control. It seems like Meghan wasn't looking for reasons to fit in, but for reasons to stand out. Notice Meghan's use of the adverb literally when she complains about the standard royal protocol for releasing photos, a problem which would have been as minuscule as it would have been common knowledge for Meghan at that point in time. The adverb's once again a persuasive element, trying to make the protocol sound ridiculous in the audience's ears. I haven't done a survey, but my educated guess is that this doesn't sound so ridiculous in most people's ears, considering the safety measures that the royal family has to take, not to mention the image they have to uphold. It sounds like Meghan will have us believe that she thought the royal life would be as simple as a Deal or No Deal episode. The end of this passage is an absolute train wreck, which reveals much more about Meghan than the press. She asks a rhetorical question about why she would give the very people that are calling her children a certain word a photo of a child before she could share it with people that love her child. So let me get this straight. The press would eventually see the photo. So now it's the order that was the problem. Sure. Also, this claim is, if not completely untrue, an extreme distortion of the truth. She involves her children in this so-called pathos argument, appeal to emotion and pity, in generalizing magazines and newspapers. She then unreliably suggests, "You tell me how that makes sense, and then I'll play that game." She doesn't really want Ellison to tell her anything. She wants Ellison to agree. The words "I'll play that game" aren't interesting in isolation, but they are interesting when parallel to her words in her infamous podcast. So I don't remember ever personally feeling the negative connotation behind the word ambitious until I started dating my now husband. It's interesting that she herself makes this connection between being ambitious, however she actually defines this adjective, and dating Harry. Could this be an embedded confession that she had ambitions with the dating? Ambitions that had very little to do with Prince Harry as a person? "I'll play that game" corresponds to this word choice, suggesting capability of pretending. Speaking of the podcast, Ellison writes that each episode features Meghan in conversation with her famous friends, discussing the ways women are unfairly labeled, an experience, Meghan notes, she has been through herself and is finally ready to talk about. I'll limit myself to 2 observations. The first one being the circularity of the podcast. Circularity because it assumes what it should be attempting to prove. As a result, it sounds like Meghan projecting her feelings about herself onto the outside world, making the outside world the adversary. The second one being the conclusion to my podcast analysis, that it's Meghan doing personal damage control under the guise of wanting change for everyone, with the word ambition, as if ambition is what's made people dislike her. Again, a self-comforting and thus a self-serving distortion of the truth. As a side note, the adverb finally, which makes her sound brave once again, is misplaced. She's not finally ready to talk about it. She got a multi-million-dollar deal, which would make most or all people want to do a podcast. And she's spoken about similar issues multiple times, before marrying Harry and before the podcast.
Went to Rwanda. The highest percentage of female parliamentarians of any government in the world. 64% of their Congress is female, which is amazing. You know, I think my biggest focus has been gender equality and women's rights, all starting from something that happened when I was really young. When I was 11 years old, there was a commercial, and I wrote these letters to have the commercial changed, and the commercial got changed. And there's a really big push for me to work with female entrepreneurs, and then all the influencers that I interview on this site, be it friends or, you know, high-profile people that I reach out to, there always has to be some sort of philanthropic element as well. And I think right now in the climate that we're seeing with so many campaigns, I mean, with Me Too and Time's Up, there is no better time than to really continue to shine a light on women feeling empowered and people really helping to support them, men included in that. I mean, it makes such a tremendous difference. So I always just stood up for what was right. How have we culturally allowed that to be the case? There's nothing wrong with talking about a woman's success or her ambition or her financial prowess.
We should always be alert to journalistic manipulation, especially in a feature with its declared goal to make the audience identify themselves with the informant. The manipulations found in the details. Meghan goes on to talk about her horrible time in the UK and finds an ally in Tyler Perry. She says he understood what this meant and that he could only imagine what it was like. Notice the context. This is simply Meghan referring to the marriage. We're not talking about the consequences of the marriage yet. This suggests that Meghan had foreknowledge before marrying Harry, and negative foreknowledge at that. It sounds very much like she knew how it was going to be and that the conclusions were already drawn. Irrespective of the passport, the press, and all the other things she's tried to blame instead of blaming herself. Self-blame isn't a possibility given Meghan's ambitious personality type, to use her own euphemism. Sometimes you can tell your life story to a stranger on a plane as opposed to some of the people that are closest to you, Meghan says. On a surface level, and especially in a world where feeling good about yourself is encouraged on a daily basis, this might sound heartwarming and even relatable. However, notice the implication of the claim, that she withheld information about her emotional state, or more likely, her actual intentions. This is actually a selfish and disloyal mindset to have. If Harry had known her thoughts, it would have saved him a lot of trouble. But then again, this isn't about him. The generalizing pronoun you is association. Again, Meghan's trying to make readers relate to the claim, even though her claim isn't a typical indicator of a well-functioning marriage. Notice the closing to this scene, but you already covered all of this in the interview for Oprah. She reminds me with a firm smile and a wave of her hand that signals it's time to move on. Here we have the telling details, a characteristic of feature journalism. But rather than leave the interpretation up to the audience, Ellison deems this part important enough to draw the conclusions for us as well. That signals it's time to move on. Obviously, the disastrous Oprah interview is still a sensitive subject that doesn't fit the narrative that Meghan's currently trying to convince people into believing. Meghan says that she and Harry didn't have jobs, so they just weren't going to come and see this house. I don't want to go and look at all the things that I can't afford. That doesn't feel good. Once more, taken in isolation, this passage isn't particularly exciting. But the words, "that doesn't feel good," are interesting. It sounds like it was unbearable for her to see the things that other people had and that she didn't have. On a surface level, it can look like she's simply being competitive, which is positive sometimes. On a deeper level, however, her word choice suggests a more negative personality trait. Notice how she doesn't simply stop at saying things she can't afford, but adds, "that doesn't feel good," as opposed to a formulation like, "it's irrelevant." Feel indicates something deeper. Ellison writes, but her ambitions for herself are more than to marry into a position. In general, Ellison shifts between truths like being given a platform and marrying Harry and the goal of feature journalism, to make people relate to the main protagonist. And then notice Meghan's grandiose language in form of standard catchphrases, right out of the handbook of almost all politicians. I say almost to be nice, and I think being nice is fitting when this video is about Meghan.
Yes, it was definitely a setup. It was a blind date.
It was a blind date,
and
for sure.
I didn't know much about him, and so the only thing that I had asked her when she said she wanted to set us up was, I had one question. I said, well, is he nice? Because if he wasn't kind, it didn't seem like it would make sense, and so we went and...
She uses many words with entirely different meanings, including nice. And in terms of dating, the last thing a guy wants to hear is that he's nice, because he knows or should know what that means. Strangely, Harry doesn't seem to care. Let's see the grandiose language. You have the power within you to create a life greater than any fairy tale you've ever read. You can be up against what could feel like the greatest obstacle, and then you can find happiness again. Two things. One, she herself suggested that she had unrealistic expectations going into the marriage by comparing herself to the Little Mermaid. Trying to match or even exceed a fairy tale is a damaging mindset to have, especially for the people in your life. Two, she talked about the greatest obstacles, since we've already seen how she defines obstacles, handing over her passport, not being able to post anything she wants on Instagram, and learning the national anthem. This falls flat compared to the resistance that other people face, even without telling the world about it. This passage reveals Meghan's constant self-defense, completely overlooking other people's reactions, because she has no idea how she comes across. In her mind, she's always doing great. Other people are wrong, and other people present obstacles. Before I go into it, let's watch a similar situation from the engagement interview, where the interviewer's question intimidated or irritated her, or both.
And it's an immense change. You're getting a new country out of it, a husband obviously, but also giving up your
nice,
career.
Yes, it's nice. Yes. But I don't see it as giving anything up. I just see it as
a change.
It's a new challenge. It's a new
chapter, right? And also keep in mind, I've been working on my show for 7 years. So we were very, very fortunate to be able to have that sort of longevity on a series. And for me, once we hit the 100 episode marker, I thought, you know what, I have ticked this box, and I feel really proud of the work I've done there. And now it's time to, as you said, work as a team with you. Yeah.
The question so sensitive to Meghan that she interrupts Harry and changes the noun challenge to chapter, which implies decisiveness, longevity, and something obviously less problematic than challenge. She makes her outlook sound positive.
And also
the words keep in mind are assertive. This commanding language indicates that there's something about the interviewer's previous words, giving up your career, that Meghan feels the need to counterattack. The counterattack consists of immediate self-praise and association with Harry. This passage reveals Meghan's defense mechanisms. These mechanisms are formed early on, and they never leave the person. They intensify. In the article, we learn that Meghan's Brave animated series was cancelled by Netflix, and we then observe her immediate blame shifting. There's not much you can do when a company and a division changes their slate, she says, and there's also not much you can do when, even if they think the project's great, the media will report it as though it was only my project. This kind of blame shifting sounds like a caricature at this point, but she does say it, and she says it seriously. And we should indeed treat it seriously, because it speaks volumes about her. It speaks volumes about personality traits, too deeply ingrained to ever be changed or even mildly modified. First of all, she doesn't want to relate this to her, because she doesn't use the personal pronoun I, but you. There's not much you can do. Seeking association and evading responsibility, further emphasized by the paratactic conjunction and the expansive adverb also. And there's also not much you can do. And then the blatantly obvious attempt to save face, even if they think the project's great. What's worth noting about her way of phrasing it, though, is that she doesn't outright say that they thought the project was great. This is a conditional clause starting with even if. This suggests that she's speaking hypothetically, not factually, what actually happened. In this passage, Meghan resorts to her go-to narrative about the intentionally vague and hence widely appealing concept, voice. She says it's like I'm not finding my voice, but being able to use it. That's one important self-repair, because she was about to contradict her vague talk about voice from her unprepared performance at the Royal Foundation Forum.
You'll often hear people say, well, you're helping women find their voices. And I fundamentally disagree with that, because women don't need to find a voice. They have a voice. They need to feel empowered to use it.
When you're using terms that don't mean anything, or mean whatever you want them to mean, it's easy to forget what you mean. Do you know what I mean? When mentioning the royal family and the escape from the UK, Meghan's self-focus doesn't disappoint. First, she kindly teaches us about the importance of forgiveness and how much effort it takes to forgive. And then she says, I've really made an active effort, with the adverb really detracting from this claim. In the Oprah interview, Meghan also decided to share her ability to forgive. The part where she made Kate the antagonist. Not on purpose, of course, but as an unfortunate consequence. Oprah asks if there was a situation where Kate might have cried or could have cried, but Meghan, of course, immediately denies this and says that Kate made her cry, even though she unreliably assures us that she's not saying this to be disparaging to anyone, thus showing us that she does say this to be disparaging, not to anyone, but to Kate specifically. The self-praise is also immediate, and she did what I would do if I knew that I hurt someone, right? To just take accountability for it. Implicitly, she gets to say two things: that Kate hurt her feelings, and that she's good at holding herself accountable, which she has yet to prove. Meghan goes on to say that she's forgiven Kate. Besides the obvious self-protective and hence unreliable word choice, Kate's track record of getting along with practically anyone makes it hard, or impossible more like it, to empathize with Meghan's hurt feelings, or even believe that her feelings were hurt at all. In the intro, I mentioned identification and persuasion as goals or features. Meghan's self-pity, grandiose sense of self-importance, and blame-shifting will make it impossible for many readers to identify themselves with her, and hence be persuaded by what she's saying. Also, I don't think Ellison's always on Meghan's side. Check my videos and playlists for more material about Meghan and Harry. And don't forget to let us know what you think about this interview.